call that there really isn't enough time in team retreats to get the kind of fine-grained detail of what's happening across WIEGO. So this is an opportunity to hear from Team Delhi about the wonderful Focal Cities work that's going on there. And we're going to apply the normal kind of format, which is to say we hear for around about half an hour from Team Delhi and all three folk who are on the call. And then there's time for question and answer. So just as we did last time, if you can indicate in the chat function that you want to, you have a question, yeah, please do that and we'll just do it in chronological order. And the spirit of these is very much about internal learning, you know, so please, Team Delhi, if there's specific feedback you need or information, you know, please feel free to ask all of us. But also the spirit of the questions, you know, it should be, as it always is in WIEGO, one of learning and openness. So I'm going to turn over to Team Delhi. And just to say, yeah, please, technology-wise, so if just the, if we can all see that we silenced, so muted rather, and that only Team Delhi's camera functions are on. It helps with the bandwidth and etc. Okay, so over to you. Shalini, are you starting us or kicking us off?
Yes, I am. And hello, good morning, good evening to everybody. And it's really a pleasure to connect, even if it is virtual. Thank you very much, Caroline, for giving us this opportunity. I want to begin by introducing Malavika. All of you have met myself and Malvika is a team member who she has.
Sorry, others finding it difficult to hear.
Urban lead at Master Plan. So,
yes.
Shalini, we're having issues hearing you. Well, so
hello.
Yeah, sorry, Shalini, we miss the introduction of Malavika. So I wonder.
Yeah. And I wonder, Shalini, if perhaps you could turn off your video, because there's a bit of the technology's not being kind on us, and I think it maybe it would be better. Yeah, great. Let's see if that works. So sorry, Shalini, yes. Do you mind just reintroducing?
Yes. So Malavika is the team member in Focal Cities Delhi, whom you people have not met. You've met me and Avi. And Malavika has a master's in political science and a degree in urban development. And so she joined us to work on the master plan and has been really a great asset to us, and has been leading this work and contributing both to content and to coalition building. So the PowerPoint as we have it will be shared by all three of us. And how we plan to present is, in the first bit, we talk a little bit, introduce the master plan a little bit in the Indian context, in the context of Delhi. Then we go on to explain why we engaged, how we engaged, and what are the activities and impact we've had so far. And then finally conclude with where we are, what are the future directions that we see as of now. So over to Malavika.
Thank you, Shalini. Is my audio clear?
It is.
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everybody. And like Shalini said, I will just straight away start off by, I want to first give you a context of Delhi as a city and just basically what the master plan is. So Delhi, as you all know, is the national capital, and it is a landlocked region. And it is part of this larger economic region, which is known as the National Capital Region. And it's a vast territory, as you can see. It's around 1,400 square kilometers, and it's quite densely populated. And the thing about Delhi is that it is predominantly urban. And over the past 2 decades, there has been a deindustrialization that has happened in the city, because of which right now, if you look at the share of the different sectors, you can see that the service sector leads employment and income in the city. And going by the government's own figures, which came out last year, only around 15% of Delhi's workers are in organized employment. So a bulk of Delhi's workers are actually informal workers, or as the government says it, they're in unorganized employment. To now move on to what exactly does the master plan of Delhi attempt to do. I just want to draw your attention to the definition that's given by the Development Authority, which makes this plan. And I think it's quite a comprehensive definition that they have. So it's basically this long-term perspective plan, which is applicable for a period of 20 years. And it actually lays down what are the space requirements for the different activities that a city's population will be involved in during this period, and all the supporting infrastructure that they would need in order to do these functions. Notably, Delhi was actually the first Indian city to have a formal master plan of this kind. And this was in the year 1962. So the first plan was applicable from 1961 to 1981. And the planning period was started in 62. And the second plan came again in 81, and the third in 2001. But there's always been traditionally a delay in the plan actually getting finalized and notified and actually implemented. So what we are right now talking about will be the fourth plan for the city, and it will be applicable from 2021 to 2041. And now in this slide, you can see this is a land use plan of Delhi currently, and this is actually the crux of the master plan. The master plan basically decides how much land and where in the city this land will be used for the functions that you can see on the right. So all the yellow areas that you can see are zoned for residential purposes. And then there's the red for commercial, and green is recreational area. So it goes on like that. Now, one thing that I just want to flag here is that we would expect that when this sort of a plan is being made, one of the actions that will be taking place is an existing land use survey to see how is land being used currently, what purposes are existing where. But in the present plan that we have right now, what is applicable, no existing land use survey was done. So the present plan actually does not recognize a lot of structures, a lot of settlements, and a lot of functions that are present in the city right now on ground. And even now, when we're talking about the next plan coming up, till now actually we have not seen any movement to do a present existing survey either. Again, just quickly to go over the institutional framework of planning. So the Delhi Development Authority, which is the agency responsible for making the plan, is a non-elected body. It consists of government officials who are nominated, and there are urban planners. So there's actually no democratic accountability of this institution. And on top of this, it actually, even compared to other Indian cities, the Delhi Master Plan in particular has a lot of power, because the Development Authority is the largest land holding agency in the city. So it actually owns land. It has the power to acquire land, and so whatever zoning the Delhi Development Authority decides, it actually owns the land enough to do that. So there are no other conflicts that can come up then. But having said that, there is also a lot of multiplicity in governance institutions. So even though they own the land and the central government, they come under the national government, and the Delhi Police, which is the chief law enforcement agency, they also come under the central government. It is the state government which actually controls the delivery of basic services. So things like water and sanitation and urban shelter, so housing, resettlement, electricity, all of this comes under the state government. And then there's, of course, the local city governments, which are the municipal corporations, which are responsible for the last mile delivery of these services. So it is here that whatever is said in the plan encounters a lot of gray areas when it comes to implementation. The process of planning is itself very long. So there is, and I'll just draw your attention to the two boxes that I've highlighted. So the green box that you can see, that is after the draft plan is made, there is a small window which is open where the plan is actually put out in the public and citizens' comments and suggestions are invited. So traditionally, this is the only place where there has been any level of citizen engagement that has happened. What we are trying to do right now is actually the stage 2. So right now the Development Authority is in stage 2 of making the next plan. So they are doing background studies and they're trying to generate the data on the basis of which the next plan will be made. So I think Shalini will talk more about it, about why this is a particularly very opportune time for us to start talking about the master plan. And just on the right, you can, it's just the figure to show you the scales of planning. So the master plan that we are talking about is the most macro scale planning instrument, which is there at the city level. And then there are zonal plans and local area plans, which are also there. But the master plan is what talks about everything at the level of the city. Shalini?
Yeah, so thank you, Malvika. So when we, why did we engage in that? And I think we want to dwell a little bit on that. So, you know, one of the first things that we started doing was that we went to this community which was in the outskirts of Delhi. It had been evicted from several locations in the center of Delhi and actually been pushed to absolutely at the periphery of the city. And it had, that's where we went as one of the first tasks that we started in WIEGO, Focal City, Delhi. And we started working with Mahila Housing Seva Trust over there to look at land tenure. So it was important to look at land tenure because these communities had been relocated from the center of Delhi because of the Commonwealth Games, and we had been given a contract for a piece of land where the people had invested and built land, built houses, and that was, the contract actually was for 15 years, and that seemed to be, that is actually came, the 15 years period, the tenure was getting over. It got over last year. So there was a certain sense of urgency that people who have invested in land and people are living there, people have invested in building a house there, that they should not lose it. So it's with this purpose of supporting MHD that we entered this area. But once we entered, we started looking at issues of livelihood, and we realized that, you know, it was a big challenge. If you look at the tables that you have over here, you will see the area around is you know, almost, it's a lot of peri-urban kind of area. So there's no work there. People had a huge amount of trouble traveling back to city to look for livelihood. And we started making those connections that we always talk about, in terms of relocation and livelihood, and how it had stumbled and how it's such a big stumbling block, and it was very clear over here. So one of the things that we started asking is, why were they relocated over here, and when was it decided, who decided it, and why was it planned the way it was? So I just want to draw your attention to these two land use in Saptakeva. At the top, you will see that there was a proposed 80-meter wide road, which would have opened a transport corridor, which would have made traveling much more easier, which is really a challenge even till today, 10 years later. But for some reason, it was not made. So similarly, you know, there were areas marked out for other things like a grid station, cremation ground, some of which were not made, and it had implications, sewage treatment plants, which had implications of people living there, their quality of life. And we started making this connection between livelihood, where people were living, and we wanted to understand more and more on planning and land use, etc. Secondly, if you remember in 2017, I hope I've got the year right, we had that Bellagio strategic meeting, which I attended, where we said that we have to engage in some way with the land use pattern, the land tenure, if we are going to talk about urban livelihood. So that was at the back of my mind. And the third thing was that when we started examining them, we started realizing that, you know, all this planning is happening without any link to livelihoods, and definitely no link to informal livelihoods. So in this community, there were these groups of people who had been working as domestic workers. They were servicing households around there. The men were also in informal livelihood, were finding work around, and all of them lost it. So when men traveled for almost 4 to 5 hours, still continue to do that, long hours of travel to go back to their places of work. Women then became home-based workers. And then, so they continued to work at home, but lack of infrastructure, etc., had a huge problem on the amount of time. So this whole debates we were having in Delhi suddenly started crystallizing of falling women's labor force participation, increasing time poverty of women, and where they are located. And this vision of a city where, you know, you see workplaces simply restricted to industry, offices, and formal markets. The third reason why we engaged was just the opportune moment. So we realized, we read that the DDA had started on the process of making this master plan. It had given NIUA, a think tank that we have worked with, a government-sponsored think tank that we had worked with. It had given NIUA a contract to do background studies, and we so that was so we thought that if DDA has started, then we should also start our efforts towards impacting the master plan. Of course, one of the other opportune movement was that when we started discussing about these things, Jenna was in Delhi, and it just helped to have her here and help us through thinking through how to engage with. And the first meeting that we had was actually led by Jenna. So this whole process in Delhi is something that all four of us have worked very, very closely with. And through all this process, I think one of the things that we wanted was that if we have to revision the city, if we have to draw the linkages between livelihood and urban development, if we have to revision the city as a city where the poor live with the rich, big with the small, then it is at this stage, at this making of this master plan, that we have to somehow engage and get some of our visions and thinking into the process. Next, please. Can you just take us to next? Yes. So, having said that, we started, as I said, we drew up a strategy of engaging with master plan, and the strategy said that it would be a revisioning process in which people's issues, especially the working poor. Now in India, there has been some engagement with the master plan in other cities, not so much in Delhi. The earlier master plan, some groups of working poor, like the waste pickers, had engaged with in the drafting of the earlier master plan, but it had remained a small kind of engagement and did not reflect very much in the master plan. In some other cities, like Bangalore, etc., there had been a larger engagement. In Mumbai, it had been a very fairly successful or fairly strong movement of the urban poor had engaged with the master plan, but it was led by activists who were working on housing and eviction and slums, etc. So when we started thinking of revisioning process, of course, we wanted to build the whole issue of working poor into it, but we realized that looking at the experiences of other cities, that we had to build a coalition. We had to build with people. We could not work in silos and say, oh, we are going to bring up the livelihood issues of the poor. And one, because our issues are so connected, but two, also learning from experiences from other cities, that often when you start putting pressure, if you are not part of a coalition and are going separately, there is also a danger of being co-opted. And the civil society then itself, one turns against the other. So we wanted to have a cohesive voice. The third was that once we realized we wanted to do that, we also realized that not everybody wanted to engage with the master plan. Many of our partners were working on livelihood issues. They were stretched thin, both in terms of resources and capacity to engage with the master plan, and also that they did not clearly understand why they should be. They were very strong on the livelihood issues, but that last mile connectivity between livelihood and the master plan was still missing when we started. And then the fourth thing was that it is okay to say revisioning. Well, how are we going to do it? Where is the statistics? How are we going to present evidence? What is the kind of evidence presentation that we want to do, which would engage with those who are hardcore planners and urban development people who are looking at reworking the master plan. So next, please. So what we decided to do, one of the first 2-3 things. One was that when our first meeting, when we called people, we were careful about not just calling activists and people who are working in the field, but also experts. So we called people who were sensitive to the livelihood issues, but were working in the domain of urban issues. We also called, again, the same kind of urban planners and architects who were sensitive to issues, had either worked with waste pickers or with street vendors. Those are the common two engagements that urban planners had. But we also got our partners from other cities to help us guide this process. So we had Darshini has been part of this group, and so has been Darshini has experience from several other cities, and one of the persons here, Arvind, was very active in the Mumbai master plan movement for housing and evictions. And then, of course, we've had Bijal from MHT, who's active in the planning process in Ahmedabad. So this was an absolute strategy that we got the right kind of people. And one of the first things we did was that we looked at the master plan as it existed. I'm not going to go into detail, but if you look at the content and vision, it is looking at several of the things that we would like it to look, and the vision, as Malvika pointed out, was actually a vision which is a very holistic kind of vision. But when we started going chapter by chapter, we realized that it was very, very thin on livelihood. It was very thin on informal livelihood, and the groups that we work with were not mentioned, barring street vendors, and that too was a very thin kind of half-hearted acknowledgement of an economic activity. So so we suddenly realized that this vision of a city did not acknowledge the working poor, and in fact it did not acknowledge the city as it existed. So it almost was not seeing the city as it was existing. It was not even, although it was supposed to be based on data economic survey, which said 85% of the working poor are in the informal sector, and yet it did not address that. So here was a plan in front of us, and we had to build a strategy then how to address some of these issues and try to influence the planning process. Malvika? Malvika? Do we have Malvika? Is your mic mute, Malvika?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please continue.
Yeah. So, like Shalini just said, that once we read the plan, the question that we were left with was actually that on what basis the next plan will be made. Because the crucial part, the first few chapters, if you see in the master plan, are actually the database and the sort of projections on the basis of which the next plan's proposals would be made. And so this framework that you see in front of you was something that we saw that if we had to do evidence building, and especially if we had to include issues of informal livelihood into the plan, then there were three sort of sets of actions that we had to do with information itself. So one basic thing would be to add to the information that the plan relies on. So actually put in numbers and make those groups visible that are not there currently. So actually give numbers to show that, you know, around 1% of the population is engaged in waste picking and they're doing a great environmental service. And why are they not there in the plan which talks about decentralized solid waste management? So add those categories and groups that are missing, and even those that are existing, how do we actually make it more reflective of the realities on ground? And the second set of action would be to challenge some norms which the plan and the other government documents also take as granted. So one of the dominant narratives that is there in the plan is the fact that there's a lot of informal settlements of the urban poor, which basically slums, that they have just taken over the city and they have encroached a lot of public land. So this is a narrative that is given to show that there is scarcity of land in the city. But some of our partners like the Indian Institute for Human Settlements, one of their research has shown that even though in Delhi around 30% of the population live in these slums, the land area under slums is only 0.6%. So actually we need to include such information, include such data in the plan which challenge these accepted norms. And the third set of action is to reframe. So like urban planners world over, I think even the Delhi master plan has very fixed notions about certain things. So for them, a home is only for shelter. And that's how the chapter is named even. But from our work, we know that homes are often also workplaces, and so are the larger neighborhoods or settlements, that these are productive environments and these are not just for shelter. So planning provisions need to be reflective of these realities as well. So based on this framework, then after that, we had several sort of general consultation meetings with, and this is while the coalition was still being built, and I'll let Avi talk about that in a minute. So after some of these general meetings, one of the reflections, that one of the suggestions which people had was that much of the knowledge that exists even within livelihood groups also and within others, so gender groups, housing rights groups, that their knowledge is very good and very deep in their sector. So it was it suggested that we should have a couple of such sectoral meetings first, and also some thematic meetings, on the basis of which later we can see how to intervene in the master plan. So the role of WIEGO focal cities at that time was to actually facilitate these meetings. And in these meetings, there were two kind of actions that were happening. So we were getting inputs from the livelihood groups, from the other groups, about what are the issues that they face. And meanwhile, actually, we had to constantly keep steering the conversation to the master plan and actually facilitate the inputs from the plan to talk to these issues. So there was a lot of capacity building that characterized these meetings. And I think, Aviv, will you carry on?
Yeah, thank you, Malvika. So as Shalini has also earlier mentioned, we have existing work that we are already doing in Focal Cities Delhi, which we use to leverage and make links with the Master Plan Coalition. So just to go back to the timeline that we saw in the previous slide, we have had 3 large level planning meetings in the last year across the coalition. We did 4 sectoral meetings, 1 with base pickers, 1 with home-based worker organizations, and 2 with street vendor organizations. And we had 4 thematic meetings, 3 around issues of housing and 1 around gender. So as you can see that our basic goal that we had for each of these meetings was to, 1, identify existing data and what further information would be required. Also to see the presence of these livelihood groups and their issues in the plan and what were the gaps that needed to be filled. Then what are the broad issues and needs that they are themselves identifying, and specifically what needs can be addressed through the master plan itself. And also to generate a basic charter of principles and demands, which would then feed into like a charter for the whole coalition itself. In terms of linking to our existing work, for the waste picker sectoral meetings, it was anchored by a platform that we are already supporting called the Delhi Roundtable on Solid Waste Management, which is working around issues of integration of waste pickers in the city's waste management systems. For home-based workers sectoral meeting, we requested HomeNet South Asia to anchor that discussion. And we have previously worked with them on developing a national policy for home-based workers, which proved to be very useful in creating the links with the master plan. And if we can sort of reflect on how it has gone so far, we did face a certain level of reluctance from the groups in terms of engaging with this issue. As Shalini has already mentioned, they were stretched quite thin. And if I say home-based workers, for example, they didn't see the value as they were completely absent from planning. They didn't see themselves in this plan. And with waste picker organizations, they didn't see the merit or the need because they were already engaging at a different level. So we held a training with the waste picker groups, for example, on the importance of planning, and we also had a sectoral meeting to identify the issues and needs, and that led to greater engagement with the issue. Another aspect of engagement that proved to be very useful was cross-representation across these meetings. So many livelihood groups took part in the housing meetings because those were issues relevant to them. And we had many activists and planners who took part in the sectoral meetings to give inputs to those as well, as we saw with our home-based worker sectoral meeting. And so this cross-representation also helped highlight the linkages between these different groups and strengthen the coalition so far. So 2 common issues that kept emerging were land and eviction. So issues of housing, land for housing, land for work, and eviction across the board. In some cases, we needed technical expertise, so we invited urban planners, architects, and sector experts to be a part of these meetings. And it also helped address another difficulty that we were facing, which was in moving from abstract to concrete recommendations. So that, of course, is ongoing. We are still in the process of concretizing recommendations from these groups. Next slide, please. If I can just talk briefly about our membership profile so far, we have around 35 to 40 organizations that are a part of the coalition, and around 25 independent researchers, activists, and planners. Our current mailing list of the coalition is roughly 150 people. And if you can see, we have different, our profile is very varied. So we have worker groups, we have housing right groups, academic institutions, we also have independent urban planners, we have activists and academics, and there is of course overlap between these different groups. So I will pass on now to Malvika. Malvika, you need to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what these posters that you are now seeing, this is actually just an example of some of the communication material that we develop. So it just takes one pertinent data point and then asks a political question. So I'm just going to move on very quickly. And again, I will not talk about all the points, but some of the very key points that have come up till now and have actually found consensus across different groups, like Avi mentioned before, is the demand, for example, for a complete no eviction policy. So both whether it is to do with housing or with livelihood, one of the key lessons that we had was that if people are present in the city in a particular place, then they do so because it makes economic and sense in all other ways for them to be there. So eviction should not be part of the plan. The plan instead should actually recognize uses that are there and zone the land which is being used for that particular purpose for that particular purpose. And even with other kinds of that, when it's reserving new land, when it's developing new land, there needs to be space in the city for an affordable housing zone. And to take the example of street vendors, India has a very good law for street vendors, which actually recognizes that most Indian cities have about 2.5% of the population practicing vending. So how is the plan of Delhi going to reflect this legislation that is there? How are we going to translate this 2.5% into land zoning? And another key point which I just draw your attention to is this thing called transit-oriented development, which is a phrase that is very much in use even in planning circles. And even the DDA, which recently held a meeting about it, were very enthusiastic about transit-oriented development. So can we sort of approach these sort of new approaches that are there in planning and ensure that livelihood linkages are maintained there? So, for example, when new metro stations come up, when new bus stations come up, ensure that there is space for informal livelihoods in these places. And I think a lot of other points are quite obvious. And Shalini?
Thank you, Malvika and Avi. So, so after a year of doing all this work and working with this group of people, activist groups, labor organizations, we had a sort of a review meeting on the 8th of March, and we feel that a coalition is taking shape, has taken shape. It might be nebulous, nascent, but it is there. And people's commitment to take this coalition forward to impact or influence the master plan exists. There was also a consensus taken that the public campaign, so we would take the master plan. People in the coalition feel that the master plan issues should be taken to the public. So there is complete silence in the media or in the public discourse on the master plan. While the government machinery and the research organization stealthily builds up the master plan and will be suddenly be given to us for with a short window of commenting or giving a feedback. So we thought that we have to stimulate this discourse around the master plan and what a master plan should be, what a vision for a master plan should be. And in the process of doing that, we realized that so the master plan process will be for 2 years till the master plan is finalized. But then in the process, we are also examining many of the questions, and then it was decided jointly and democratically that perhaps we should, in the process, also try to develop a urban agenda for Delhi city. And because we have elections in 2020, the city level, the state and the city level elections, it becomes more relevant to do that. Our role has shifted. So while we did a lot of very active mobilizing, I think now the role that is we see for ourselves and others see for ourselves is that we take a back foot and the coalition moves forward, but it is not strong enough to move on its own. There will be groups which will need nurturing. Definitely the livelihood groups will need further nurturing, and that's where we think that our support will be good for them. And then, of course, this how to present data in visual form. So master plan is a visual document. How do we counteract that visually? How to present data is something that we are constantly struggling with. And where is that data, and how do we present it to counteract, to add to, or to reframe some of the questions? So that's where we are, and I want to end with this final slide with questions aimed at my colleagues within WIEGO. And the first one is, and this is the kind of support that we would very much we need and we want from you all, because it is something that we have not done. It is also a complex technical a document. The process is very, very bureaucratic, and we struggle in so many places to be able to articulate in an effective way any kind of intervention that we want. So my first question is that what has been the experience of working on city level planning in other cities where we have worked? We know any other city where we have engaged, what can we learn from there? Who are the people who can be in touch with us? The second question that I want to ask is that, as I said, the information, we want to present a different vision of the city, which includes the working poor. But in terms of statistics, in terms of numbers, what we can use for our advocacy, we don't have enough at the city level. And also the need of the sectors vary. So it's a complex process. So first, the problem is that we don't have enough numbers at the city level to be able to highlight the work contribution of the informal economy. The second is that the need of the informal economy is not universal across all sectors. So while the base pickers are in the conversation, but we don't know how to reflect their need for a decentralized waste segregation center in actually the planning process of the city, at what level. The street vendors are very much mentioned and included, but how to translate their demands into land use patterns and how to ensure that there is, and the fact that the Act actually talks about the power of the town mending committee, how to bring coherence into these kind of things, and the invisibility of the home-based workers. Now, all of this has to be reflected visually in some kind of a document, advocacy material, some kind of visual mapping, and we constantly try to do it, but we would very, very much like help in visualizing those kind of things. So as I said, what kind of spatial mapping would be useful to make these points that we are trying to make, and what kind of effective visual communication would be good, which can engage with people across sectors, non-technical people, but also non-technical people in the sense that people who are not looking at livelihood issues, but also catch the attention of planners and people who are looking at urban issues. So it's a wide range of people that we are looking at with a different set of messages, but also wanting to put it in a visual format. So these are the challenge, and with different kind of messages for different sectors. So these are the challenges that we are grappling with, and we really, really need your support, help, insights into addressing some of them. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much to the three of you. I mean, I think that certainly master plans across the globe are tools for exclusion. And I think Team Delhi seems to be leading the way in terms of us really thinking through this set of issues. So thank you very much for outlining this so very clearly. Could we perhaps leave the last slide of questions, the previous slide on the screen, so that And now really to turn it around to everybody who's around our virtual table for comments, for feedback, any points of curiosity. And if you could just identify yourself in the chat function, then we'll just take it in chronological order. So I'm not seeing any comments yet. Comms team, any?
I had raised my hand.
Sorry, I didn't see it. Yeah, Sonia, please go ahead.
Thank you. No, thank you so much for this very comprehensive presentation. And one thing that kind of resonated with the kind of experience that we have here, it's how these processes of master plan, be it, master plan for the city as a whole, or in the case of what we have been doing here, which is more a master plan focused on solid waste management, how the process can be used as an educational tool, as a capacity building for the waste speakers and also for coalition building. And so for me, one of the key issues about this process is the educational or capacity building opportunities that are out there and the opportunities for coalition. Because one key issue for me in terms of doing all these planning processes is how to actually transform what is in paper. And it may have very progressive language in some contexts or not very progressive in other contexts, how to translate that into action. And for me has been one of the bottlenecks about planning processes, how to go from the paper to action. And so I have a question. If in the course of the daily process, there is a kind of strategy in terms of having a monitoring system, like having perhaps a coalition of like-minded partners that can group together in terms of putting pressure from what is in the paper to be put in action. So yeah, I have a question. Is there any strategy, in terms of monitoring of implementation of the plan? Thanks.
So maybe just to turn, while other people are thinking of their questions, perhaps if any of the three presenters would like to reflect on that. Yeah. And then Jane, well, so actually let's take a question from Jane and then we can go back to the presenters. Jane?
Okay. Hi, everybody. I was just wondering what sense Shalini and the rest of the leadership have of any shifts that are starting to take place. I mean, are they starting to feel like the discourse and the understanding of the officials and the planners and so on is starting to take the issues on board?
Could I jump in with a question as well that connects to, I think, what Sonia and Jane are asking?
Yes, please, Anna.
Okay. Thank you, Team Delhi. That was really wonderful and thoughtful presentation. I was just wondering if you could provide some insights as to the changes in the actual workers' perceptions about the importance of participating. And if you can tell us a bit about the turning points related to the strategies you took. Because I think this is very important for sustaining the momentum of the discussions.
Okay, those are lovely three interlinking questions. So the question about a monitoring system, and then shifts that are starting to take place generally and particularly in the minds of workers. So Team Delhi, who wants to have a first shot? Shalini, do you want to start?
I'll go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah. Sonia, this is first the answer is no. that we haven't been able to think of a monitoring system. But it is something that we have to really engage with, because even when the policy arena, forget about the plan, the policy arena changes. So we have the solid waste management rules, which is in place. But you know, the implementation process, how to evaluate it, how to monitor it, it varies so much across cities that we have been really grappling in Delhi also. What exactly do we mean by integration? What, who needs to be integrated where? Because there are different modes, you know, there are different waste pickers. Some are collecting from door to door, some are sorting, some are collecting and sorting, some are working at the dump sites. So where is it that we and there is this solid waste management rules, which is very positive, and can, how do we engage with this rule, and in terms of translate this rule from paper to action. And we've been struggling, I must say, a little bit, because many of our waste picker groups are also new to this waste management rules, and what we have been doing at the focal city level is trying to facilitate an understanding of the changed policy environment, which can translate into a change organizing methodology and principle, and a changing advocacy agenda. So it's not now that we talk about just recognition of the contribution, but we just say, well, you know, the municipality, according to the rule, is supposed to issue us I-cards. And in Bangalore, they have done that much. And in Pune, they have done this much. This is how we need to be included. So the municipality comes back and includes only the workers who are working with in a particular site. Or it says, okay, in some areas, what it has done is that it has included workers which are working with private companies in collecting waste. Now, again, suddenly the strategy has to change to counter this kind of move. So translating from paper to plans, paper to action, we haven't done it with the master plan. We are really at its very, very inception. But this is something that we are trying to do, particularly in solid waste management, vis-a-vis the rules. So that's my response to your question, Sonia. The second is, Jane, you talked about perception of the planners. So we haven't gone to the planners as yet. We are just preparing to go to the planners. We've built a coalition. We are trying to build an alternative vision of the city, an alternative discourse. And now at this, after 1 year, now we have started asking for an advocacy strategy, to be called for meetings, to be able to present an alternative data to the data collecting and the discussions groups that have been created. So the changing perception of the planners is at the next stage. At this stage, we have only tried to build a strategy, tried to build a knowledge base, and tried to build a coalition, which would then move into influencing the planners. And the perception change actually is, we see it in our day-to-day activities, and perhaps I should give you a couple of examples. So when we were talking about eviction and relocation, it was the meeting was dominated by activists who were working on urban issues, on evictions, slums, and it was dominated by people who are looking at housing. But we insisted that we wanted to get a home-based worker from a relocated and evicted and relocated colony. So when this home-based worker came, she talked about how the whole process of eviction and relocation had disrupted the livelihood of her entire family and what impact it had had, and how her choices in the labor market were so determined by this location of where she was. She was not a home-based worker before. She had to take up home-based work because there was no alternative to employment. So this, and there were some people who were from some workers who had come actually as part of housing rights activists. So this connection between workers, and they immediately identified what she was saying, and there were several stories of how people had lost livelihood. So that was one thing. Then when we had the gender meeting, the gender groups talked, many of you know about this horrific rape that happened a few years back, and women's security became a very big issue. At that time, the government set up a committee, it's called Justice Verma Committee, for making recommendations on safety and security of women. And that group, they made very, very good recommendations. And one of the recommendations that they said was that the street vendors are eyes on the street, and women feel much safer where there are street vendors and where there's economic activity going on walking down those streets. Now, again, something that became something of a link between the street vendor groups were very happy to pick it up and work with the gender group. So it became a link between the gender groups. Secondly, one small example, and then I'm going to finish, is again, we have a ruling we have a ruling, a court ruling, which says that the footpath should be of 9 feet. It should be 9 feet wide. And I think 4 feet are for walking and 3 feet are for vending. And the groups which talk about pollution, vehicular pollution, and having footpaths for people to cycle and walk usually are in conflict with the vendors and the presence of vendors. But suddenly, when we started talking about, how can we do it in a way so that this conflict is addressed, it became a point of contact between different groups of people. So yes, perceptions change, and the workers are the first to make the contact because their lives and their lived realities are in continuum, and it's very interesting to see that.
So Shalini, thank you. I'm mindful that we only have a few more minutes left, and did want to just point out Dimitra had wanted to raise or offer some help. She's had to leave the call, but please to follow up with her about the campaign and branding. So you have one offer of help. I am mindful that we haven't really answered all your 4 pertinent questions, but just to outline that I think that these events will always be the start of a conversation. So I think there's lots of us across the globe who are following these issues. So, we will come back to you now knowing what's going on in Delhi with content and feedback. But just in the last 2 minutes, is there any feedback from Avi, Malavika? Any final words from you in response to the questions, or any additional issues that you'd wanted feedback from the broader group? Avi?
No, I don't have like general feedback because I think Shalini really covered the broad spectrum of what it was. But I did, of course, want to follow up on the communication aspect of it. And I'm very happy that Dimitra has offered to help us out with that. So we will be following up with her on that.
Okay. And Malavika, any issues you want to add?
Yes, just one more example, just to add to Shalini's last point, especially to do with this change in workers' perception. So I think one meeting especially which immediately came to my mind was the one with the waste pickers. And actually initially that meeting was, a lot of the planning language was taking place. So a lot of technical proposals. So we actually even had a planner who proposed a model for the material recovery facility, which would be there at the neighborhood level. And at this point, actually, the conversation became very interesting because we had a lot of worker representatives in that meeting who were immediately able to sort of see the holes in this very technical planner's model of what the waste material recovery facility should look like. So they immediately came back with comments on the size and the the provisions that should be there. So if there is actually a staircase which leads to another level, and then they came back with with the comment that, this would be extremely hard on waste pickers because they would have to carry really heavy weights and take it to this top level. So and also other things that, segregation, the kind of space that they need actually differs across the kind of neighborhood. So in a low income neighborhood, the space required for driveway segregation would actually be much lesser. That this is what a comment that came from the workers themselves. So especially when we could tap into that particular scale at which workers are impacted by decisions of the plan, I think those moments were very interesting, because then the conversation really took off between what the plan says and what workers encounter every day. So I just wanted to add that as well.
Thank you. So I am, unfortunately, we have run out of time, and I think that just to keep everybody on board, we are going to be quite strict about the hour. So I wanted to say a huge thank you to Team Delhi, and Malavika, welcome to WIEGO. Lovely to have you on board. So for one thing, there are a few advertorials. So as Leslie has pointed out, if we all want to track these issues, Daily Diary is totally worth reading. So please do track what's going on. And very much, yeah, as I said, I'm hoping this is part of a conversation. So we'll continue to give you all feedback as issues and resources come our way. And also a final advertorial to say our next webinar is we're going to shift focus entirely, and we're going to look at something that's top of mind for all of us in terms of our reporting processes. So Rhonda will be talking to us about monitoring and evaluation and kind of thinking through how we understand impact as we go. So in 4 Thursdays time, please come and join us again at the space. And a final thank you just to Pilar for just keeping us on board and doing everything behind the scenes to make it possible to do this. So yeah, warm wishes to everybody. See you again in 4 weeks time. And do give us any feedback, please, feedback content to Team Delhi, who are clearly kind of pushing boundaries on this issue, but also feedback about the webinars. Please contact Pilar and myself and let us know if there's any ideas you have. So yes, thanks very much. See you soon.
Thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Team Delhi. And just a final reminder, these sessions are being recorded. So we are going to post the video in the intranet. So feel free to share it with the people that you want extra feedback or comments. And we will make sure as well we send emails to some of those people.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone. And I'm going to stop recording at this moment.
Great.
Have a good day, everyone.
And evening to the people in India who are now at 7 o'clock tonight. So big thanks.